Well, welcome back to the All Out Club podcast. And as the NRL season fully wraps up, we are in full swings of the summer of cricket. And there's no better person than our special guest to preview the summer of cricket, senior journalist and chief cricket editor at the Courier Mail, Mr. Robert Crash Craddock. Crash, welcome.
Thank you,
Crash.
I'm honoured to be a guest, boys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I can't believe it's October already. NRL is basically over, AFL done. Sort of comes to the time where all of Australia's obsessed with cricket.
It does, and I love the fact there's a few loose threads in the Australian team. I've been to coffee shops today and around Borderfield, and everyone's saying, who's going to be Australia's next new opener? With Steve Smith retreating to number 4. I can't even answer that myself at the moment, but it's lovely to have debates, people watching screens, and this is the summer for me. I love an early season selection debate to get interest in that test team.
There you go. Yeah. It is interesting when that happens. And I saw your article where Australia could very well field a team without anyone in their 20s, which is like never been seen before. Do you think we should preference a young up-and-comer, or do you just think we should pick the best player possible?
I think if it's a 50-50 call, definitely go with youth. Or even if it's a 40-60, even if Sam Constance from New South Wales is only not quite there, I'd still go with him. I think it is concerning. You think of that. No player in your 20s in a test team. That's extraordinary. We've had teams where they've been all in their 20s. So eventually Australia will hit a wall and they'll have a lot of replacements to do. This is what they'll do. They'll try and get through this series against India and next year's Ashes series in Australia before major changes, and then a lot of players will retire and it'll happen naturally, and they will take on sort of the likes of New Zealand and Sri Lanka with weaker teams, I should say. But here's the thing, guys. If several players fall off a cliff against India this summer and there's no one there to replace them, that's when it really hurts you not having young
could
players.
Could be a clearing out.
Oh yeah. If you've got an older batsman who just fades out of the team, or one of the 3 great quicks we've got, Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, if one of them has problems, the replacements they're not youthful, and you love youthful exuberance in the team, which we haven't got with Cam Green injured with the back injury.
Is there, despite the Ashes crash, is there a more hyped or anticipated series than India at home? I mean, because this year it's a big series, isn't it? They beat us last time, and then when we were on home soil, it's a big series for Australia.
Oh, well, it's extraordinarily, we've lost the last 2 home series against India, which is...
It's unheard of, isn't it?
It's unheard of. I remember when I started cricket writing, the Indian team used to come to Australia almost in a bashful state of mind. Mohammad Azharuddin would be the captain, and he'd look at his shoes during press conferences and mumble. But you know what happened in about the year 2000? The technological revolution took place, and India were pace setters of the world. They've gone from being afterthoughts in cricket. We had one decade, I think it was the 60s or 70s. We toured India once. Now they run the game.
Yeah.
The change is extraordinary. I went to a lunch during a Bangalore test, and I sat next to this guy. And you just sense someone's important. They've got a few people around you. I said, "What do you do, mate?" I said, "Who do you work for?" He said, "Hotmail." And I said, "Oh, right, okay. You a technician?" He said, "No, I invented it." He invented Hot. So that's the sort of caliber of people floating around cricket in India.
Sort of reflecting on last year, West Indies maybe the biggest upset on Australian soil we've ever seen. I know you said, I think on SEN Cricket, Australia lack a bit of a intimidating aura.
Yep.
Do you think that's important, something that we might be missing in this upcoming series, or do you just think maybe we don't have it, but we don't necessarily need it?
Great question. I've often thought a lot about that issue, actually, because since the Indian Premier League started and players got to know each other better, they lack that aura of what you might call distant intimidation. Now, I'll give you 2 examples. Glenn McGrath, the Australian fast bowler, when he was on tour, a lot of rival batsmen, if I met him at functions, I'd say, what's McGrath like? Because he doesn't talk to us. He doesn't socialise. Equally, the classic example was Curtly Ambrose, a great West Indian fast bowler, who would speak to only one Australian.
Talk about aura.
Oh, wow. You got him. Alan Border, and he would say 2 words to him. He would, of a morning, he would say, "Morning, skipper." And that was it. No one got anything else. So you never got in, and he had a very, very powerful aura. I do feel Australia has lost their aura. They play nice guy cricket now, and I like that. They're a friendly team. They're not a nasty team. But you do not fear Australia the way you used to fear them. And I see it all the time. There was times when Warne was in full stride, Shane Warne, and his intimidation started from the top of his run up with his eyes. Mike Gatting said that. He said he turned around, he'd flick the ball from one hand to the other, and he'd just look at you. And he said he'd look you up and down, and just to the corner of this mouth, he might move you, say, "I think I've got you, champ." Yep. And so it's no longer there. It is no longer there.
On the flip side, Crash, there's a lot of talk about India and their aura. Do you still feel like Kholi has that sort of punch when he comes to Australia? Hey, I'm going to get 100 and I'm going to smack you around here. I'm not getting that sense this year when he comes.
No, I'm the same. He's not what he was. He and Stephen Smith are very similar. Steve Smith had, I think, 4 years where he averaged over 70, not 50. This year he's averaged 30 in Test cricket. Last year, 40. So he's not the player he was. And Kholi's the same. He hasn't got... I actually think, strangely enough, that the one sight of the top 7 batsmen that they fear the most is when Rishabh Pant, the wicketkeeper, gets away.
Yeah.
Because he plays without a real plan. He's a real slogger and very dangerous. And, if you don't get him within 80 minutes, he'll have scored 80 runs.
Well, it happened at the Gabba last time, didn't it?
It did. And they find him very difficult to plan for. Kholi's very structurally correct, but you can plan for him. And Josh Hazelwood's got a fabulous record against him. I think he's got him out 10 times. So there's your matchup. But that Pant is unnervingly unpredictable. So, yeah, that's an aura. And I think with their 2 quicks, you're going to expect me to say Jasprit Bumrah is a master, and he is, and he's calculating, and he's thoughtful, and he's dangerous. But I know this for a fact, that at Australian team meetings, they spent even more time talking about Mohammad Shami, because he's got this look about him. He does. He nibbles and he wobbles, and he's got, he's nobody's idea of the sort of pin-up heartthrob or anything, but he's deceptively quick and very canny. And to me, if you said make a prediction for this tour, like what do you think's going to happen? If you could go ahead and find out one fact, if you could show me whether Mohammad Shami with his knee injury plays this series, and if you could show me his bowling average for this series, I reckon I can pick the winner of this series, because I think if he's in, that's trouble. He's unnervingly good.
He is. He performed well last time he was here as well, and he always does.
He did, and it's old-fashioned. Swing bowling at high speed, it just takes wickets, and he's quite something.
Do we think we're panicking a little bit with the order? I know there's a lot of discussions at the moment. Who's going to open the batting? Smith going back to 4, Marnus at 3. I mean, Marnus's form recently hasn't been the greatest. Is there a sense of panic in the Australian lineup? Because Usman, obviously, we saw him speak about top 6, not as a top 6, but in individual sort of batting spots. Who's your pick for the opening spot? And would you go with that youth with Sam Constas?
I would be leaning towards Constas, although I want to see him bat in the current Sheffield Shield match against Victoria.
Yeah.
But I have to say this. I wouldn't call it panic. I'd call it uncertainty and mild confusion, because they're caught between the present and the future and the past.
Yeah.
And they've given 3 guys opportunity. It won't be Renshaw. He hasn't scored the runs. Harris is looming into contention strongly.
Yep.
And Bancroft opened the season with a duck, but he's still in contention. So, but all those guys had chances. And to me, if you've had about 10 tests, they owe you nothing. Yeah. That's why there's no apologies to Market Harris or Bancroft if they're not picked. You've had your chance and you failed. If you get another one, it's a bonus. Whereas Constance is an interesting one. There is a feeling he goes a little hard at the ball outside off stump, and against Bumrah, who just goes schnick, that would be an extremely vulnerable habit. But at some stage, you've got to have a look at a kid. I talked to Doug Walters, who made his Test debut in the late 1960s at age 19 and scored 150 at the Gabba against England in an Ashes Test, first up, incredible. And I said, how nervous were you? And he said, do you know what? Not really that nervous.
Yeah.
He said, I was a 19-year-old playing Test cricket. He said, I thought it was wonderful. He said, later the nerves came.
Yeah.
He said, when I was fighting for an Ashes tour at age 30, then I got nervous. He said, but first Test, it was more youthful excitement.
Yeah.
And it made me think that's what you're going to get with Constance if you play him. He scored centuries all the way through junior cricket and 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, centuries, which is quite rare.
It's a feat.
It's a feat. So I'd be going with him, but I say that with no certainty that selectors will follow.
With like Bancroft, as you said, I feel like Constance will come in, be like, I'm young, I'll have another chance, whereas Bancroft's like, this is it.
Yep.
And that sort of tightens you up. Like even when the selectors were there at the Shield games, you could sort of tell when those players tighten up and don't play carefree, which I think Constance is.
Yeah, I see so many of them, and Nick Maddison's another example. I know a friend of his who really rates him highly, but he was on a really good run a few years back, and then stories started to appear, Nick Maddison Test chance, and my mate saw the story in the paper and he said, see that? Nick will hate that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He just loves to fly under the radar. So, yeah, and even Matthew Hayden, the great Matthew Hayden.
Took him a while.
Yeah, it did. And he often says, he said, I had this pattern in my career where every time I was, quote, on trial, I just didn't do the business. He said, he said it was just incredible in these selection games, whether it be under 19s, whether it be Queensland, when they said, right, showdown, Hayden versus Slater, something like that. He said, so, yeah, we forget the pressure, and particularly for a batsman, different for a bowler. You get, you're going to get 20 overs, 120 balls. Batsman, one snick and you're gone.
One good ball, that could be your career. Back to like the youth and sort of, I was thinking this team sort of reminds me of the late 2000s, where obviously dominant, but a couple of years away, and it could be 2011 Ashes all over again. Is that sort of another thing we got to think about?
It does. There's an open door for England next year when they come to Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. You think of it. Every player in this first Test team, if they don't pick Constance, will be over 30. And then you go a year away to the Ashes tour hosting here, and a full year of more over 30s. I mean, Usman Khawaja turns 38 in December. So England will be looking at this and saying, we are a chance. Sometimes they're not. Next season they are. They've got an open door. If they can play well, they will force changes. They will force Australia to blood a new generation. My theory right here now is that they don't have the bowlers to beat Australia. Not a bad batting lineup, and I sense Harry Brook is a once-in-a-generation player for England.
Are you a fan of Bazball?
Yes.
You like the Bazball?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I do. We try and shoot it down in Australia. It's trendy to say, oh, what about the bombs? No.
We need a reason to hate them.
Yeah, but I don't mind at all. Look, if I'm passing the television and there's a bit of cricket on the box, I stop immediately if it's Ben Duckett and Zach Crawley opening the batting for England. They're good fun to watch.
Excitement.
Exactly. They go hard at the ball. Duckett plays it something like 19 out of every 20 balls he faces. He's incredible. He breaks every rule. They're good fun. I like it. It's not flawless cricket, and it hasn't turned them into a brilliant team, but, oh, gosh, they've been good to watch. No, I like it. I really do.
They are, I'm sure, prone to collapses. Actually, we saw that in India. Was that surprising seeing India collapse like that in New Zealand?
Yeah, it was, to be bowled out for, what was it, 46.
Yeah, amazing.
But I tell you what it reinforced to me, New Zealand are very good against everyone bar Australia. The stats was incredible. What was it? It was something like they won one Test out of their last 40 against us before the last.
It's not a great record.
Or 2 out of 40. That's extraordinary. I mean, and yet against every other nation, that they give a yelp, but yeah, India are an unusual team. Their top order can be gettable and vulnerable on any given day, but the force of their collective talent is dangerous for Australia. I think this will be a wonderful series. I can't wait.
Crash, as you know, player-journo sort of relationship is super important for your job. We sort of, as studying journos, we also, well, from my point of view, I love the behind the scenes of everything. I love hearing the stories behind the scenes, what players are doing, the stories that you don't see on the media that I love hearing. Is there a sort of favourite story that you can resonate with that comes to mind about a player that you heard, a coach that you can share?
Look, I always think of Shane Warne when you ask questions like that, and I'll never forget being in a pool on the 1998 Indian tour, and I said to the physio Errol Alcott, "Have you got any stories for me?" "I've got nothing." He said, "No, it's so quiet." He said, "Anyway, I've got to go. I've got to send a fax to Cricket Australia because Warnie's run out of baked beans, and you've got to get. If we don't get him, he could become malnourished before the test." I said, "What a story. That'll do me." So we ran on the back page of the paper, had a photo of Warnie with baked bean cans raining down upon him because they sent this SOS. Heinz said this big crate over this with about 600 cans. They swooped in the publicity. Oh, did they ever? And Warnie rang me in my room and said, "Mate, you've completely humiliated me." He said, he said, "Everyone's laughing at me and whatever." And he said, "You've made as if I eat baked beans all the time." He said, I have them sometimes, not that often." I said, "Oh, sorry, mate." And then anyway, 5 minutes passed, and guess what? I went down for breakfast, and he went down for breakfast after our phone call. I was a little bit behind him, and sure enough, out on his table, what do you reckon he had? And when he saw me, you know what he did? He hid the can behind the flowers so I couldn't see it, as if say, "I'm not giving this bloke the pleasure of me eating baked beans." But then, hey, guess what? After giving me a serve, 4 months later, I get a press release saying Shane Warne has signed a contract to promote this baked beans company, and he got 60 grand out of it. So
Secretly, he was loving it.
Yeah, he did, and but what a character, so generous. And
was he one of the greatest entertainers we've ever had in Australian sport? Almost. He's got to be
sport in general.
Well, he loved being a showman. When he first started, our good friend Jim Tucker had a magazine called Inside Edge, and he said, "Shane, would you pose as a magician with a rabbit in a hat, a black cap, you with a wand and juggling cricket balls?" And most cricketers would say, "Oh, no," because they'll all take the mickey out of me and I'll get hit for 6 and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, hey, how's your magic act now going, pal?"
Yeah.
And Warnie said, "What a great photo. That'd be fantastic." And I just remember from that day, and it was a beautiful photo. It was one of the best taken. The magician, here he is. He only played for a year at top level at that stage. I thought, here's a guy who embraces the spotlight. I remember interviewing him, and his phone, he got up and he had to see someone, and I saw who was ringing him. It was Chris Martin from Coldplay.
Yeah.
Mick Jagger said to Warnie, "I've only ever met one person in my life who, if I could swap places with them, I would, and it's you." And Elton John said the same thing. So yeah, he was quite something.
I can't imagine him coming through now in the social media age.
Oh,
he would absolutely killed it.
Well, there'd be two things. He would have been a social media sensation, and it would have been his worst enemy because
100%.
He loved nightlife, and he was very a bit of a heartthrob and all that. So it was just coming in towards the end of his life, but it would have been tough for him under certain.
You can't hide anything nowadays.
No, you can't. And he, here's another one. I remember he signed up to give up cigarettes, and it coincided with a really, really good period of form. And so we did an interview with him in the West Indies, and we said, "Does this form coincide with your pledge to give up the durries for 6 months?" And he said, "I think you're right. I'm feeling fitter and stronger." I said, "What a good story."
Who would have thought?
Yeah. And then we did the story outside the dressing room, and we were chatting to someone else. And then when we were walking back to the press box behind the dressing room, there was Warnie having a durry. So, in other words, and he sort of raised his eyebrows and his hands as if say, hey, boys, sometimes you've just got to say what you've just got to say. So it wasn't the durries after all.
Oh, he's a larrikin, isn't he? Is that sort of era of Australian cricket, and I don't want to talk about cricket the whole time because there's a whole lot to get through, but that sort of era with Ponting, Warne, McGrath, where does that stack up with this era? Because we've retained 2 Ashes in England. We haven't won it. Where do you think? Where do you stack them up?
I refuse to believe anything else that when McGrath and Warne were at the peak of their careers in the late 1990s, that was the peak of Australian cricket. At one point, they won 17 tests in a row, and it would have been 18 had not England ran them down in Calcutta after being asked to follow on. 17 tests in a row. You think of that. Gilchrist is your wicketkeeper. He's averaging about 50. You've got the spinner who can bowl on day 1 or day 5, Warne, and McGrath taking wickets all around the world at an average of 22. And just while you're there, I'll throw in Jason Gillespie and Matthew Hayden, who scored 30 centuries in 103 tests. So if we're playing talent poker, all right, and I've got that team, 11 in my hand, and you say, I'll hand down this player, and I say, well, I'll match you with the Gilchrist. And you show me a decent opener, and I'll say, well, there's my Matthew Hayden, average 50. I reckon I've probably got you. They weren't, they lost the occasional test, but very, very rarely.
I also think cricket in general sort of peaked because internationally, every country had all-time greats.
Yep.
Like West Indies may not have been excellent at that time, but they still had one of the best batsmen ever in Lara. What are your thoughts on probably the last question about cricket, but thoughts on international cricket as a whole at the moment?
It's a very good point because you're right. And in the 80s, one of the reasons I rate Alan Border so highly is because he had to face superstars from every nation. Kapil Dev from India, Malcolm Marshall, the West Indies, Richard Hadley, Bob Willis. So, and you're right, back in the early years of this century, Kumar Sangakkara from Sri Lanka, what did he average, 57 or something in tests? Sachin Tendulkar, say no more. A.B. de Villiers and Callis.
Yeah.
Whereas now you say to me, who's Sri Lanka's superstar? Who's South Africa's superstar? That worries me immensely.
West Indies superstar. Where'd they go?
And I get that T20 cricket has got a lot of kids interested in the game. It's worked. It's good. It's great for players. But I tell you one thing I've learnt from it as well. You don't, unless you're in the Indian Premier League, you don't become a bona fide superstar by playing for a franchise. You do that by playing international cricket. Kane Williamson did not become a star playing IPL cricket. You've still got to get that star quality through your country, and I'm glad that's the way. Otherwise, guys wouldn't play.
I got to ask one more, Crash, before we move on. Kerry O'Keefe, he's one of the great men. From what we can see on TV, he's an absolute larrikin. What is it like working with him? Because he seems just like a bundle of joy every time we see him on the TV. Yeah,
when I first started in cricket writing in the early 1990s, I couldn't read technique, and I still can't. So I said to my mate, who's a good analyst? And they said, Kerry O'Keefe. He said he was just working for Armaguard. He's working on the stock exchange. He has no gig as a commentator. He'll probably never return to cricket commentary. So for 10 years, he was my coach.
Yeah.
We'd ring him up 3 times a week, and they're my greatest memories in cricket. We'd talk for an hour like we're talking now about cricket. And because no one knew we talked to each other, we were so open. Like I'd say, I've had a massive blue with Warnie today at training. He said, what do you say? I said, with this and that. So I've adored him for 30 years. And as much as I was grateful that I was getting his information, I thought, how can the world not discover this guy?
Yeah.
Because he's this unusual combination of the class clown and the class nerd who does all this research. No one researches more. No one's funnier. But it all changed for him one day when he was on a show called The Fat and hosted by Tony Squires. And Kerry said, mate, this is my big chance. They're thinking about giving me a contract. This is about the year 2000. And and he couldn't get a word in the whole show. And I was watching it at home thinking, oh, no. But the last line of the show, Tony turned to him and said, we'll catch you next week, folks, but Kerry O'Keefe, in 10 seconds or less, tell me why Adam Gilchrist's form is so important for Australia. And Kerry said, because it's a victim for every cricketer who's been pulled from the womb by their ears. Because Gilly's got big ears. And it was just a beautiful sign-off to the show. The producer loved it. He invited him back. He got a contract. So on the strength of that one line, he then spiraled to prominence. He's the best. I really believe he's the best commentator in the game.
He spoke at a long lunch that my old man was at, and he spoke very openly about his childhood and his upbringing with his parents. I'm not sure if you might know yourself, but the way that he's sort of taken that and then he got an opportunity, he took it, and he's going to throw everything 100% into this opportunity. It's sort of a testament to himself as a person.
Well, he's age 73 now. Wow.
Yeah, and he's still going. He loves it.
And he's still... his research level is as high as it's ever been. You know, Fox absolutely adore him. I understand he signed a 3 or 4 year deal. Like that takes him to 77 or something. Like there's only one Kerry O'Keefe, and
no one else like him.
No, and what I love about him is the feedback you get from him on him when he's on the back page on Fox Sports. We get this beautiful feedback, you know, and like here's a strange story about him. When I turned 60, my mates got him to send me a message, and he said, is Craddock past his best? He said, I would probably say so, because to find his best work, you've actually got to fly to Queensland, buy an old Queenslander, rip up that old lino on the floor, and those old yellow newspapers underneath, there you see it, by Robert Craddock. He said, that's 50 years ago. You know what I mean? So who thinks of lines like that?
Yeah.
So quick-witted. I already liked him, but then I found out he was a St. George Dragons fan like me. He couldn't get better. Actually, in reference to NRL, we should probably ask some footy questions. We're traditionally footy. Last night, PNG, dominant win over Fiji. Do you have any opinion on them as maybe the next NRL team, or who should be?
Yeah, there's so much work to be done with this PNG franchise. It sounds like a good idea. It's soft diplomacy. Australia's worried that China will get into PNG and then attack us. And we're saying PNG, they're National Sports Rugby League. There's the only country which it is. So we'll get them on side. But friends of mine who go there, I haven't been there for many years, say that they, security-wise and everything-wise, it's a long, long way to go. I don't mind the Western Bears franchise because the Bears were a great club, and that can work, and I think it will work. The negotiations are frosty at the moment, but you watch, they'll come together.
Look, Crash, Michael Maguire, he's got a lot on his plate at the Broncos. I mean, in the last 48 hours, there's a fair bit of news coming out of Broncos land, and as the NRL sort of finishes it, the reporting on the Broncos, I guess, never stops. Has the Broncos sort of premiership window faded, in your opinion, or is it up in flames at the moment? And where do you see the Broncos in probably the next 2 or 3 years?
1 year left for mine. When Adam Reynolds retires at the end of next year, I cannot possibly think they are going to win the premiership for any time in the next 3 or 4 years after that, because they don't have a halfback, which you have to have. And people say, oh, they might sign Sam Walker from the Roosters. Oh, they don't lose many players they want to lose, the Roosters. They have this incredible habit of just somehow finding the right money from them. I don't know how it happens. But
the sombrero. That's
I think we've done a few memes about that.
But it's right now, and I've just written a column about that for tomorrow, saying that Michael Maguire, good luck, you're going to need it because this is your moment. So many Broncos coaches have been in this position where you are caught between the standards that you are trying to introduce and the reality that you need the player who's committed the crime, such as Ezra Mam, who on Friday night was involved in the incident where he had a car crash. He allegedly tested positive to a drug, and also he was not licensed to drive the car. So that's a very, very serious issue.
Do you think that opens the door to maybe a Ben Hunt signing, but at the same time, he's very
He's at the end of his
experienced, but
career.
he is at the end of his career.
I don't think so. Only because it's not a bad suggestion, but he is 34.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Titans only 24 hours ago said, no, we've got to look forward, not past, not back. And it's a very provocative thought because he's a former Bronco. He was, you know, played in the 2015 grand final against the Cowboys, and he knows a lot of people around the club. He knows everything. I could see, if at the right price, a very, very handy. It depends where he is in his career, but I wouldn't imagine he'd be the real deal.
Well, he could play 9, but you're sort of thinking you need someone to replace Mam if that's going to be an issue.
Yep. It's and he's with them for next season. So yeah.
And finally, crash on the NRL. The Penrith Panthers. Simply, are they the best team in the modern era, like that we've ever seen ever?
Yeah.
All sports.
Yeah.
They got to be up there.
I think you've got to give them that 4 premierships in a row in a salary cap era. I mean, we used to write the stat all the time. In the salary cap era, no team has won 2 in a row. And then the Roosters did it. Wow. And 4 in a row?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's staggering, really. Their ability to manage the salary cap, and I know some of their players take unders just to stay there and be part of the party. Like Nathan Cleary's on allegedly 1.2.
Toa's got to be on unders.
Yeah, who's that?
Brian Toa.
Yeah,
I think
what's he on?
Well, I know during the season it was fake news, but someone said he was looking at other clubs because he was just on unders.
Yeah.
And they're also so great at replacing talent.
Yeah, they are. But you know what? Here's the thing. People say, oh, Cleary could get 1.4, 1.5 at another club. But if the self-preservation of playing at Penrith in a really good side, living in where he is raised, amongst a team he's comfortable with, an environment he loves, if that extends his career by 1 year, hang on, that's $1.2 million. He gets it all back.
Yeah.
He gets it all. He gets the 4 premierships. And like if Nathan Cleary went to the West Tigers, it would shorten his career for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But the fact that he stays at Penrith, he can keep going for a long period of time. He's only
26, isn't he?
Yeah.
26.
It's hard to get bored of winning, but do you think it ever pops into his head, I sort of want not a challenge, but just a different path in my career because his dad's his coach. You know, he's obviously got the girlfriend. Do you think union's a suggestion, or is that Super League talk all fabricated?
Well, because he goes out with Mary Fowler, who's based in England, has been that theory that he would finish his career in England. I mean, it's just such a long way away. And you know what? I'd be surprised if they had. He said, it hasn't even been discussed. I'd be surprised if they had discussed it. You know, they
Joey John's carear type.
Yeah. Why not? But I don't think it gets boring for him in the NRL. But there are always challenges there, like winning more State of Origin series. You know, getting back playing for Australia again. You know, there's always and also he is taking rugby league into a place it's never been in the modern era. 4 premierships in a row. Like you think, God, let's see if we can do 5. You know, you never get sick of it.
The scary thing about Penrith, I reckon, you could sort of see it in the final. Like Storm didn't play up to their best, and I think Penrith are like, we got nothing to lose here. We've already won 3. We can sort of do whatever we want on the field.
There was a bit of that. There was a bit of, wasn't it funny? In the first 5 minutes of the game, you could just tell Penrith was so composed, and you felt like saying their great challenge, Penrith, was getting to the grand final. Once they were there, we've been to this rodeo before. We know how to do it. Where there was just 2 or 3 young Storm players that you could tell were very nervous.
And it showed. We might end up in this crash because your time is very valuable. Oz versus India series, your score prediction, and finally your most favourite athlete over your whole career. Who is it? And we might end it all there.
Okay, I would say I'll give Australia 2-1. No, I'll give Australia, 2-1. I think it'll be a heck of a series, but I reckon Australia, at some stage, if Mohamed Shami doesn't tour, India will be exposed for the lack of quicks. I really do. And I don't believe they can play Jadeja and Ashwin, the two spinners, in every test like they want to. In terms of favourite athlete, look, I really enjoyed the way that Alan Border conducted himself throughout his career. He was around before media managers, so he had to manage the media himself. His home phone, if you want me to repeat, it's 378. I could tell you his home number. I've rung it that many times. And I didn't realise why Alan answered the phone like this at home. Hello? And I thought, gee, that's quite intense. But then I had to photo shoot at his place and I went out and it rang every 10 minutes. And I thought, this guy is being harassed beyond belief. And in the 1980s, when Australia was desperate and down, didn't win a series for 4 years, he was the guy that kept it afloat. And I love the fibre of the guy. And when we did a documentary on him for Fox Sports, we said, what would you give yourself out of 10 for your career, AB? What would you say, you know? And he said 7. A flat pass mark. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You know, there's modesty personified. And he said one
average.
and at the end of it, when we'd ordered pizzas and we're sitting around, and he made this thing, which I love, this comment, he said, you know, these influencers and that, what are they sort of actually done? And he wasn't bitter, but he was just curious. And I went, well, are they, actually, AB, compared to you, I've got to say it, not much.
What do they do again?
I said, you've got me. And he said, yeah, I just, no, but what have they done? And I said, yeah, not much, AB. Yeah, because, and I just thought, a fair question. The greatest influencer cricket saw in the 1980s is quite perplexed that.
It's him.
Yeah. He's one heck of a guy.
Thank you, Crash, for coming on again. Thanks for your time. Hopefully listeners got a bit of an insight into certain players, certain teams. Thanks again.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And all the best for the summer, that's for sure.
Thanks, lads.
It's going to be a great one.
Keep up the great work on your podcast. I know you have a lot of listeners, and I'll be tuning in for this and many more.
Thanks, Crash.
Thanks, Crash.